There's something happening inside your lungs right now that most doctors never talk about. Not because they don't know, but because it doesn't show up on a standard exam. It doesn't trigger an alarm on a blood test. And it rarely causes enough pain to make you rush to an emergency room. But it's there, quietly, persistently. And if you've ever woken up needing to clear your throat before you could even speak, if you've ever felt like your chest was carrying something heavy that just wouldn't go away, if you've ever taken a deep breath and felt like you didn't quite get enough air, then what I'm about to share with you may be the most important thing you hear this year. My name is Dr. Vincent Halberg. I've spent over 2 decades studying respiratory health, pulmonary inflammation, and what I call the silent accumulation cycle. And I want to start with a question, just one. When was the last time you breathed without thinking about it? Not a breath you had to work for, not one that came with a cough or a heaviness, or that familiar feeling of something sitting in your chest, a breath that was just effortless. If you had a pause to remember, keep watching, because that pause means something. Most people assume that if they're not diagnosed with asthma or COPD, their lungs are fine. They assume the occasional clearing of the throat is just a habit. They assume the morning cough is from dry air. They assume the heavy feeling in their chest is stress. And they move on. But here's what I've observed in patients over and over again. The ones who ignored those signs the longest were always the ones who showed up later with something much harder to reverse. Not because they were unlucky, but because they didn't understand what those signals were trying to tell them. So let me tell you something that changes everything. Mucus is not the problem. Mucus is a warning signal. Your body produces it for a reason. It's part of a sophisticated defense system designed to trap particles, bacteria, allergens, anything that shouldn't be deep inside your airways. In a healthy respiratory system, that mucus moves. It gets cleared. Your lungs have this remarkable self-cleaning mechanism. Tiny hair-like structures called cilia that sweep debris upward so it can be expelled. It's elegant. It's efficient. And for most of your life, it probably worked without you ever noticing. But something can disrupt that system. And when it does, the mucus stops moving. It starts to accumulate, slowly, layer by layer, in pockets of your airways that you can't feel and certainly can't see. And here's where it gets important. When mucus sits still for long enough, it becomes a breeding ground. Not necessarily for a full infection, not the kind that puts you in bed with a fever, but for a low-grade, persistent irritation that keeps your immune system slightly activated all the time. Scientists call this chronic low-grade inflammation, and it is far more common than most people realize. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It shows up as fatigue you can't explain, as that recurring need to clear your throat, as the feeling that your lungs are never quite empty when you exhale, as waking up congested even when you're not sick. These are not random symptoms. They are your body communicating in the only language it has, sensation. Now, what causes the cilia to stop working properly? This is where most conversations about respiratory health go wrong, because they focus entirely on the visible causes: smoking, pollution, a bad cold. And yes, those matter. But there's another category of disruption that almost nobody talks about, and it affects far more people than we'd like to admit. It's invisible. It floats through the air in enclosed spaces. It hides inside walls, behind furniture, underneath floors. Mold. Environmental mold. Not necessarily the dramatic black mold that makes headlines. I'm talking about microscopic spores that circulate in everyday indoor environments, apartments, offices, older buildings, and when inhaled repeatedly over months or years, they can silently impair the very mechanisms your lungs use to clean themselves. The cilia become sluggish. The mucus becomes thicker. The cycle of accumulation begins. And before you think this doesn't apply to you, consider this. Studies suggest that a significant percentage of indoor environments contain some level of mold contamination. Most people will never see it. Many will never smell it, but their lungs will register it, quietly, persistently, until the symptoms start to feel normal, until the morning clearing of the throat becomes just part of the routine, until breathing deeply feels like effort instead of reflex, until you've simply accepted a version of your respiratory health that is far below what your body is capable of. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because that normalization, that quiet acceptance of discomfort as just the way things are, is exactly how this progresses unnoticed. And here's the part that most people miss entirely. The system that was designed to protect you, the cilia, the mucus clearance, the natural filtration of your airways, that system can be supported. It can be helped, not forced, not overridden. Supported, the way you'd support a drainage system that's become partially blocked. You don't replace it. You help it function the way it was always supposed to. And this is the exact moment I want to speak directly to you. Because if you're feeling any of what I've described, the heaviness, the recurring congestion, the breath that never feels completely satisfying, your body is not broken. It is asking for help. And the longer that ask goes unanswered, the harder the clearing process becomes. I've watched patients spend years managing symptoms with short-term solutions, decongestants, antihistamine sprays, without ever addressing what was actually happening beneath the surface. The mucus would return. The inflammation would persist, because nothing was supporting the system itself. What actually made a difference for the people I've seen recover their breathing most fully was something different, something that worked with the body's own clearing mechanisms rather than around them. A natural approach focused on reducing the inflammatory load, supporting mucociliary function, and helping the airways gradually regain their capacity to clean themselves. There is a method, completely natural, that has been helping people do exactly this. Supporting the body's respiratory clearing process from the inside, helping reduce that persistent low-grade irritation that keeps the system stuck, helping the airways breathe with less resistance and more ease. I've seen what this kind of support can do when the body is still in a responsive state, and that matters because responsiveness is not something you have indefinitely. The link to learn more is in the description and in the first comment below. I want you to go there after this video, not because I'm telling you to, but because of what I've described sounds familiar. If your chest, your throat, your breath have been trying to tell you something, you owe it to yourself to understand your options while that window is still open. Now, let me keep going, because there's something else about this cycle that you need to understand, something that explains why so many people feel like their respiratory health is slowly, quietly declining without any clear reason. Your lungs have a capacity that most people never fully access. At rest, the average adult uses only a fraction of their total lung volume. But here's what matters. When your airways are partially obstructed by accumulated mucus and inflammation, that fraction shrinks even further, and your body adapts. Your breathing becomes shallower, shorter, more effortful. And because this happens gradually, you don't notice a decline. You simply adjust your expectations. You stop climbing stairs as fast. You choose the elevator. You take breaks during activities that used to feel easy. You blame it on age, on stress, on being out of shape. But what if the real reason is that your lungs are working against a resistance that shouldn't be there? There is research, serious, peer-reviewed research, showing that persistent airway inflammation can significantly reduce lung function over time, even in people who have never smoked and have no formal diagnosis. The inflammation doesn't need a dramatic cause. It can sustain itself through repeated low-level exposures, allergens, indoor pollutants, environmental spores, even the byproducts of chronic mucus accumulation themselves. The irritation triggers more mucus. More mucus creates more irritation, and the cycle reinforces itself until someone or something interrupts it. That interruption is what I've spent a large part of my career thinking about, because a conventional approach, decongestants, antihistamines, short-term treatments, addresses a symptom without touching the underlying cycle. You feel better for a few days, then it returns, because nothing changed at the level of the mechanism. The cilia are still sluggish. The inflammation is still present. The environment that triggered it in the first place hasn't changed, and the body, working without adequate support, simply restarts the same pattern. True respiratory support has to work at a deeper level. It has to help the body's own clearing mechanisms become more efficient. It has to address the inflammation that keeps the system in a state of chronic activation. And it has to do this in a way that is sustainable, not something you take for a week and stop. Something that becomes part of how you care for your respiratory health the way you care for your cardiovascular health, your metabolic health, your sleep, as a system, consistently, over time. Now I want to tell you something that may feel uncomfortable. The window of opportunity to support your respiratory system naturally, before the accumulation becomes structural, before the inflammation becomes chronic and entrenched, before the capacity loss becomes measurable on a test. That window is not infinite. I don't say this to frighten you. I say it because it's true, and because I believe you deserve the truth. Every month that the accumulation continues unchecked, the clearance becomes harder. Every month that the low-grade inflammation persists, the tissue becomes more sensitized. The body still responds. It responds remarkably well, in fact, when given the right conditions. But that responsiveness is not constant across time. There is a meaningful difference between addressing this at the early signal stage and addressing it after years of accumulated burden. The people I've seen who recovered their breathing most fully, who went from that heavy, congested, effortful feeling to breathing that was genuinely easy and clear, almost universally had one thing in common. They acted before they felt they had to. They didn't wait for the diagnosis. They didn't wait until the symptoms were severe. They paid attention to the early signals. The morning clearing, the slight heaviness, the breath that wasn't quite satisfying, and they chose to support their system while it was still highly responsive. That choice made all the difference. If you are watching this right now, you still have that window. Your body is still sending you signals rather than shutting them out. That means it's still communicating, still responding, still capable of clearing, of reducing inflammation, of restoring ease to a process that should never have required effort in the first place. The natural method I mentioned earlier, the one that has been helping people support their body's respiratory clearing process, is available for you right now. The link is in the description and in the first comment. Go there now, not tomorrow, not after the next symptom. Now, because a body that responds today may respond very differently in 6 months, not because it's broken, but because patterns that go unsupported long enough eventually become the new baseline. And once they do, recovery takes far longer. Your lungs have been working for you every single moment of your life, without rest, without pause, without asking for anything in return. This is the moment to give something back. The link is waiting for you. Take the first step while your body is still asking, not after it stops.